Hey guys, welcome back to a sixth video on the Shadowrun Returns Editor after a short 18-month hiatus. I promised that we would move on after the last video to discuss hubs and the process of moving your characters backwards and forwards between hubs and missions, which is really the sort of the core mechanic by which your story progresses from beginning to end in this game engine. And I think I asked you or invited you at the end of the last video to create some kind of hub map, some kind of map that could act as a hub, give it a camera region, and give it a single player spawner. That's really all we need. And because after making the last videos I built a new PC and lost all the files from my old PC, I had to build things from scratch, which is one of the reasons this took so long. I just couldn't be bothered. But I've got some energy now. A few people have been asking me to continue the series, so here we are. I went back and rebuilt the map that we made together over the last 5 videos, although I only made the bare bones of it. It's still got the Barry NPC, it's still got the Lone Star we need to kill, and it's got the bare bones of the quest we made, although it's far more simple. And then I've taken some junk piece of garbage hub map that I was making at some point in the last few months and just imported that to use as a hub. Now there's a lot of garbage scattered around this map that we don't need. As I said, all you need is a bit of terrain to walk on, your own player spawner, and the camera region so you can actually get things working. Now we're going to talk about hubs, we're going to talk about global variables, we're going to talk about moving between maps. This is not a complicated or difficult subject, but it is. There are a lot of moving parts and they all rely on one another. And it's difficult to sort of, you have to arbitrarily choose somewhere to start to explain this. So it can be a little bit, it can seem sometimes a little bit illogical when you're talking about it. So in order to make sure that I don't forget or miss anything, I've actually created all the parts we're going to need. And I'm just going to go back over the steps and repeat the process. So it's probably worth talking a little bit about the overall architecture of these campaigns. The game is divided up into scenes or maps. Each scene or map is like a discrete level, and it is completely, apart from the fact that they all reside in the same overall content pack, they're all completely independent of one another. The only thing that really moves between them is the player character. No information is exchanged between them. They don't know what goes in on one from the other. But we need to make sure that they do know what, or they at least appear to know what goes on from one to another, because you'll be familiar from playing the game with the fact that, for example, you start in a hub, the hub exists in a certain state, right? The NPCs say certain things, they have certain lines of conversation, they ask you to go and do something in a completely different map, you go and do the thing, and when you return, the NPCs in your hub say new things and say different things. So they need to have some way of knowing what's going on outside of their own scenes, although they're completely separate. And that is all achieved with something called a story variable or a global variable. And so if we come up to our top bar of the editor, there's a little icon like a magazine or an open book with the tooltip Edit Content Pack Properties. And if we open that, on the right hand side, there is a canvas with a green cross above it, and if we click that green cross, we can add a new variable. We can give it a name and a type. And for our purposes, we're going to want to create an integer rather than a float, a boolean, or a string. And as you can see, I've already created one and I've called it global story variable. You can call it whatever you want, but call it something sensible so you know what it is. And it has a default value of 0. And that's absolutely fine. We'll click OK. Now, your global story variable exists completely independently of any particular scene in the game. But it can be changed from any scene and referenced from any other scene, which is how we achieve what I've just discussed. The problem of exchanging data between scenes, we do it with these global variables. So I'm trying to break down what is it's a potentially infinitely complex subject, right? Because this is the whole structure of the game is built around this concept. So we could choose an arbitrary number of examples to build out, and I want to keep it as simple as humanly possible. So what we're going to do for the purposes of this tutorial is we're going to make 2 states for the world. We're going to have the hub as it exists before you go and see Barry, and then we're going to have the hub as it exists after you go and see Barry. So the player needs to see that something has changed, and we're going to do that with an NPC who has conversations We're going to start in the hub. They're going to say, go see Barry. You're going to go to a different scene. You're going to see Barry. When you come back, they're going to say, you've seen Barry. The world has changed. So as your first thing to do, in your hub, near your player spawner or just somewhere convenient, just drop in an actor spawner. One of these little green triangles. You should be familiar. It's the same thing we did when we made Barry. We're going to, in their properties, we're going to make them an actor type of non-combatant. We're going to make their team civilian, so they won't follow us around. They're their own entity. You can give them a name. I've called mine, the one I've already made, I've called it Quest Boy. They're our quest giver. And then in their little character sheet, you can give them a portrait and some clothes, you know, so they look, you know, the same every time. And just, like I say, put them somewhere convenient. And then we want to make those two conversations that one NPC will have that will say what state the world is in. Now we could, if we wanted to, build these conversations out the same way we did the Barry one, with different chains of dialogue to go down and with different conditions to check them. That's one way of doing it, but it's not the way that it's done in the base game, and I presume there is a good reason for that, so I'm going to show you another way of doing it. And that is to create two completely separate conversations, and to assign those conversations at the beginning of the map loading, depending on the condition of the story variable. Right? So here up in my scene data, you can see I've got two conversations. I've called them Hub State 1 and Hub State 2. But we can just make them fresh. We just go File, New Conversation. And then all I've done is, and I'll show you in the existing examples, Hub State 1 is just one node of dialogue. The person, whoever speaks this dialogue, says, go and see Barry. And then in State 2, when the world has changed, they say, Barry has been seen. That's it. But then we need to assign it. So down on the bottom left on the scene data, we've got triggers. And I've created two new triggers, one called State 1 and one called State 2. And they're both pretty much the same. The State 1 trigger has a when condition of when the map is started. So we would say when on map start, and it will say when the continue button is pressed. We've got an if condition, and we've said if compare integer, and we'll say if, we'll change 0 to story variable, global story variable. If global story variable is equal to 0, and then we've got a do, an action, green cross, and I think we've chosen dialogue, assign conversation to actor, and we're going to assign existing conversation hub state 1, and we're going to assign that conversation to our existing actor quest giver or quest boy, and that's it. And then for state 2, we do much the same thing, except we say if the global story variable is equal to 1 rather than 0, we assign the state 2 conversation to this same NPC. I think that's pretty simple. I hope that's pretty simple. We've got a story variable in the background. Every time this hub map is loaded, we check the condition of that variable and we assign one of two conversations depending on what that variable is, what its value is. Easy peasy. So now we actually need to make the change though. We need to make the transition. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go and see Barry. We need to go from the hub scene to the mission scene, the mission map. And I'm going to do this with invisible props. And actually, if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to do a bit of tinkering. You don't need to pay any attention to what I'm doing right now. You can ignore those two button presses. So we need to make a transition. We need to make a clickable thing, right? Now you can assign that interaction to particular props. So we could take this MTR, we could click the hammer, and we could make it a scene transition. But we don't want to do that. Just it's bad practice to do it, and it makes your life more complicated than you need to. So a good way of doing this is in your asset library, you want to find an invisible prop non-solid. And I'm just going to drag it out into empty space so we can work on it. And I'm going to give it a name. And its prop name is going to be Mission 1 Transition. And then I'm going to assign with the hammer an interaction to it. Interaction type by default is none. I'm going to make it scene transition. I'm going to disable the button which says enable at map start. So by default this will not be enabled. And at the bottom where it says scene to load, I'm going to choose chapter 01, scene 01, first map, which is the map we made with Barry. And I'm going to get some confirmation text. Do you want to go see Barry? Do you want to go see Barry? And click apply. So when it's enabled, this box will have a little button we can click on. And if we choose to follow it, it will take us to see Barry. But by default, it is not enabled. We've disabled it by default. So now we need to link it to the appropriate conversation. So we again go back to hub state 1 conversation, go see Barry, and we highlight that final node where the NPC gives us the task, and under conditions and actions, we click the green cross, we create an effect or an action. And the action I want is props, enable or disable interactable object. And I'm going to enable the interactable object. And then I can choose mission 1 transition, which is this invisible prop we just created. And I click save. And save the conversation. We can close that now. So we load up the hub. And I'm going to, at every step, I'm going to recap what we've just gone over. We load up the hub. The global variable is set to 0. And because the global variable is set to 0, the first state conversation is assigned to the quest giver. And when we have that conversation, the transition to the next map is enabled. That takes us halfway. Now we need to get from the next map, we need to complete the objective, change the story variable, come home, and see the result of the change in the world. So let's now load up the Barry quest map, that first map we created. And again, I've already put in place the changes we need, but we'll go through every step of it. So in our new map, I've moved my player spawners over here to the exterior. Before, we always had them inside. You'll remember they were always near to Barry. I've moved them outside. That's just a cosmetic issue. You can do it or not. It doesn't really matter. So the first things first, let's create our transition home. So again, we're going to create an invisible prop, non-solid. And we're going to call it transition hub. And then we're going to give it an interaction with the hammer. Interaction type is going to be scene transition. And the scene to load will be tutorial 1 hub, which is what I've called my map, tutorial 1 hub. And I'm going to disable the interaction at map start. And I'm going to say, as confirmation text, do you want to go home? And click apply. So by default, again, this interaction is available, but it's not interactable to the player. It exists, but the player can't see it. I'm going to put it over this this underpass or whatever the hell this thing is. And so now we need to find a way from within this scene to enable it, and we do that by our conversation with Barry. That seems like the most logical way of doing it. So we open our conversation with Barry. Again, yours will be more intricate and have more options than mine, but you basically want to choose the end of your relationship with Barry, or for example, the end of the quest where he gives you your reward. For me, that node is this one where he says, "Good job, dude." And we want to, when he gives us our reward, we know that's the last time we'll be able to see that particular line of dialogue. So we make the changes we want to make. We need to make 2 changes. The first one is we need to go to system, and we want to set our global story variable tutorial 1, which is achieved through system set variable. Change our global story variable. It's 0 by default. We'll change it to 1. And then we want to enable our interaction to get back home again. So in our second effect, we choose action props, enable interactable object, and we choose transition to hub. And we know we're not going to be able to see this line of dialogue again, so we don't have to worry about setting up any like infinite loops or anything like that. And so now I think we've got everything we need. We've got our 2 conversations with our quest giver back in the hub. They're assigned by 2 different levels of the story variable. We've got the transition to get to see Barry. We can do the quest for Barry. He increments the story variable, and that enables us to get our transition back to the hub where we'll see the world has changed. So unless I'm forgetting anything monstrous, let's we'll load up our hub again, and we'll load up the scratch pad with a little green cross, because we're going to test this out in game. When we load the scratch pad, the first thing we can see is that under story variables, our global story variable is there and it's visible and it has a default value of 0. I'm going to take in a loaded main character. You probably should too, because on your hub you won't have any party members. And we're going to load up into the game. Let's load up and see how this is looking. This is actually the 4th time I've recorded this video today. Last time it was perfect, but then my neighbour started banging around next door and you could hear it on my microphone, which is incredibly annoying. The first 2 times I just was not making any goddamn sense whatsoever. Let's load up one of my many identical characters. I don't have any like introductory text or anything here. We'll cover that later. Okay, so we're in our hub. And this is our quest giving NPC. This NPC up here is a vendor. That's just like leftovers from the last time I made this map. But pay attention to where they are. They're underneath this awning. They won't be there when we come back because they're going to reference various triggers that we've already made. But for now, let's just look at the quest giver. And our quest giver says, go see Barry. So the story variable we know is set to 0. It's assigned this first conversation, this state 1 conversation. And when the conversation ends, this transition appears on the van. So we can click on that and drive off to see Barry. If we were being neat and tidy, we would probably have disabled this conversation at this point. But you know, we just want to get it working. So we'll take the transition to Barry's house. And the map will load very slowly. On my really outrageously powerful computer, it still loads very slowly. Okay, here we go. And we're going to buy up a few characters. I'll take you. Give me a Duncan. I like Duncan. He's my bro. Okay, so we're loaded in the map. We know that there's a transition to go home. It's here, but it hasn't been enabled yet, so we can't see it. Let's go inside. And we'll run down here and see Barry and get the quest. And Barry's going to say, he's going to say kill Lone Star, but I can't spell, so it says Lone Star like a bank loan. Go kill those dudes over there for me. We'll open the door, get on the floor. And we'll just kill these guys quickly. It shouldn't take very long. And then once the quest is completed, we can access the appropriate chain of dialogue for Barry. And so he says to me, he says, you know, good job, dude. In the background, we've enabled the scene transition to get back to the hub, and we've incremented the global story variable from 0 to 1. And so now when we travel outside and go back to the hub, the hub is going to start loading now. Do you want to go home? Yes, absolutely. And it's going to check its trigger conditions, and it's going to say, what is the global story variable? It's 1, so we assign that second state conversation to the quest giver NPC. And so although the map is the same and the NPC is the same, their actual available dialogue will change. And we can go in here and talk to them, and they say Barry has been seen, and you notice the transition to the Barry quest is no longer available here. And you know, we could enable another transition to a completely different map in the same place or in some other place now. You'll also notice that this vendor, who I asked you to remember, they spawned over here, now they spawn over here. Yeah, there's nothing special, it's just some leftover scripts from when I made this map, but this vendor changes the contents and the things they have available to sell to the player based on the state of the story. So we can open up their inventory, and this is now a level 3 vendor, whereas before, although I didn't show you, it was a level 1 vendor. I think I'll leave that for another video. This is 20 minutes long, and I like to keep these short and digestible. So yeah, it's a complicated subject to condense down to 20 minutes, but I hope that makes sense. And this is the core architecture of a whole campaign. As long as you get this working and you follow the steps, you can just expand it to an arbitrary extent and get like a massive campaign working. It just takes time and effort. One thing I didn't cover merchants. That's another important thing. I'll make another video for merchants. That should be much simpler, using a lot of the same parts we've implemented in this video. Another thing I didn't cover is the fact that every time you load the hub, you'll remember from playing the campaign, the introductory or descriptive text on the loading screen is different, even though it's the same scene. That is accomplished through text expansions, which we've already looked at in some of the NPC dialogue. And I think I'll probably address that maybe in the next video as well, which I promise I will make in a more timely fashion than this one. So yeah, I hope that's been presented in a coherent way and an intelligible way. Thank you for watching, and thank you to everybody who recently started commenting and asking for this to continue. I noticed no comments whatsoever for a long time, which is fine, but then suddenly everybody's trapped at home, I think, with this coronavirus thing, and everybody's like, I want to do something creative. And I've had this rush of comments of people asking for more, so thank you to those guys, because I probably wouldn't have bothered if you hadn't asked. So yeah, thank you for watching, take care, stay safe, see you next time.